Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something delightfully dark and twisted from ancient Greece. So go ahead and dim those lights, grab your coziest blanket, and settle in for what I promise will be the most relaxing journey through absolute terror you've ever experienced. Tonight, we're counting down the top 5 most terrifying Greek monsters. But don't worry, we're going to take our sweet, sleepy time with each one. Now, before you start thinking this is going to be some jump scare fest, let me reassure you, we're not here to give you nightmares. We're here to gently float through the darkest corners of Greek mythology like we're on the world's most morbid lazy river. Think of it as bedtime stories, but with significantly more bloodshed and tentacles. The ancient Greeks, bless their dramatic hearts, really knew how to create monsters that would make modern horror writers weep with envy. But here's the thing, they didn't just create random scary things. Oh no, that would be too simple. Every single one of these creatures had a backstory more twisted than a Habsburg family tree. And we're going to explore every delicious, horrible detail. So let's begin our gentle descent into mythological madness, starting with number 5 on our list. Our 5th most terrifying Greek monster is the Sphinx. And honestly, she deserves a spot on this list for sheer passive-aggressive energy alone. Picture this. You're just trying to get into Thebes, maybe visit some family, do a little shopping in the agora, live your best ancient Greek life. But no. Instead, you encounter what is essentially a lion with a woman's head and eagle wings who has decided to make geography contingent on your performance in what amounts to ancient Greek Jeopardy. The Sphinx wasn't just any old monster, though. She was the daughter of Typhon and Echidna, basically the power couple of Greek monstrosity. And like any good trust fund baby, she decided to make everyone else's life miserable just because she could. She perched herself on a rock outside Thebes and basically held the entire city hostage with her little riddle game. Here's how it worked. You approach Thebes, she asks you a riddle, you get it wrong, she eats you. You get it right, you can pass. Simple, right? Except the riddle was apparently so difficult that literally everyone was getting it wrong and becoming Sphinx food. The people of Thebes were probably looking at this situation thinking, great, our city's main entrance is now guarded by a murderous librarian. The riddle itself was actually pretty famous. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? And honestly, once you hear the answer, you kind of want to go back in time and shake all those people who died because they couldn't figure out it was talking about humans, crawling as babies, walking as adults, and using canes when old. It's like dying because you couldn't solve a particularly morbid children's book. But here's where it gets interesting in that special Greek way. The Sphinx wasn't just randomly evil. She was sent by the gods as punishment. Because of course she was. Someone in Thebes had ticked off the divine powers, and rather than just sending a plague or some locusts like a normal vengeful deity, they decided to install a permanent riddle-based death trap at the city gates. The really tragic part is that the Sphinx was actually quite beautiful, at least from the neck up. Ancient descriptions talk about her lovely face and melodious voice. So you'd be walking up to Thebes, see this gorgeous woman, think, what a pleasant encounter this will be, And then notice the whole lion body situation. It's like the ultimate catfish scenario, except instead of just being disappointed, you'd end up as dinner. The Sphinx's reign of terror continued until Oedipus showed up. Yes, that Oedipus, the one with the whole mother situation we don't need to get into right now. But credit where credit is due, he solved the riddle, and the Sphinx was so devastated by this turn of events that she threw herself off her rock and died. Which seems like a bit of an overreaction, honestly. You'd think after all that time asking the same riddle, she might have prepared a backup question or two. What makes the Sphinx particularly terrifying isn't just the whole eating people who can't solve riddles thing. It's the psychological torture of it all. She would sit there, beautiful and terrible, asking her question with perfect patience, no rushing, no hints, just waiting for your inevitable wrong answer with the kind of serene confidence that comes from having eaten dozens of travelers who thought they were clever. The Sphinx represents something uniquely Greek in its horror, the terror of intellectual inadequacy. In a culture that valued wisdom and cleverness above almost everything else, there's something particularly nightmarish about being killed not by superior strength or divine wrath, but by your own inability to think quickly enough. It's death by pop quiz, and somehow that feels more personal than being torn apart by a regular monster. And let's be honest, even knowing the answer now, there's something chilling about imagining standing before this creature, your life hanging in the balance of your ability to think clearly under pressure. The Sphinx didn't just kill bodies. She killed hope, one failed riddle at a time. Coming in at number 4, we have the Harpies. And these ladies deserve their spot for being perhaps the most persistently annoying monsters in all of Greek mythology. Imagine the worst combination of a vengeful ex-girlfriend and a seagull that steals your french fries. Give it wings and claws, and you're starting to get the picture. The Harpies were originally described as beautiful winged women, because of course they were. The Greeks had this thing about making their monsters initially attractive. It's like they understood the psychological principle that true horror comes from having your expectations subverted. But over time, the Harpies evolved into something far more terrifying. Creatures with women's heads and bird bodies, complete with razor-sharp talons and a smell that could knock you unconscious from 50 feet away. Their most famous victim was King Phineus, and honestly, his story is so perfectly Greek in its over-the-top awfulness that you almost have to admire the commitment to making one man's life as miserable as possible. Phineus had been given the gift of prophecy by the gods, which sounds nice, until you realize that, in Greek mythology, divine gifts always come with horrific catches. The gods decided that Phineus was being a little too free with his predictions, so they sent the Harpies to torment him. Here's how the Harpies operated. Every time Phineus tried to eat, they would swoop down, steal his food, and defecate all over whatever they couldn't carry away. Yes, you read that correctly. The Harpies were basically weaponized pigeons with human intelligence and divine backing. They turned mealtime into a nightmare of stolen food and bird droppings, and they did this for years. Think about the psychological warfare involved here. You're already dealing with being blind, because, of course, Phineus was also blind, because the gods really didn't believe in half measures when it came to punishment. You're hungry, you can't see, and every time you try to eat, these shrieking creatures descend from the sky to steal your dinner and leave you gagging on the smell of their presence. The Harpies weren't just random monsters either. They had names: Aolo, Seleno, and Ocypete, which roughly translate to storm swift, dark, and swift flying. These weren't just mindless beasts. They were intelligent, organized, and absolutely committed to their job of making Phineas's life a living hell. They had a professional approach to torment that's almost admirable in its thoroughness. What makes the Harpies particularly terrifying is their combination of intelligence and pettiness. They could have just killed Phineas quickly and been done with it, but instead they chose the slow route of psychological torture through starvation and humiliation. They were essentially running a long-term harassment campaign with wings. The smell situation deserves special mention here. Ancient sources consistently describe the Harpies as having an absolutely revolting odor, something so bad that it would make people vomit just from being in their presence. So not only were they stealing food and defecating everywhere, they were also conducting biological warfare through sheer stench. It's like they were designed by committee to be as comprehensively awful as possible. The Harpies finally got their comeuppance when the Argonauts showed up. Two of them, Zetes and Calais, who happened to be winged themselves, chased the Harpies away from Phineas. But even then, the Harpies weren't destroyed, they were just relocated, because apparently the gods felt that the world still needed flying creatures dedicated to ruining people's meals and general quality of life. What's truly chilling about the Harpies is how personal their torment was. They weren't interested in quick kills or grand gestures of destruction. They were all about the slow, grinding horror of daily life made impossible. They represent the terror of having your most basic needs, eating, dignity, peace, systematically destroyed by forces beyond your control. The Harpies remind us that sometimes the most frightening monsters aren't the ones that kill you quickly. Sometimes they're the ones that make you wish you were dead instead. At number 3, we have perhaps the most famous monster in all of Greek mythology, Medusa. And honestly, her story is so perfectly tragically Greek that it reads like someone took every possible way to ruin a woman's life and decided to apply them all at once, with divine approval. Let's start with what everyone knows. Medusa could turn people to stone just by looking at them. But that's just the headline. The real horror of Medusa is in the details of how she became this way. And trust me, it's a masterclass in victim blaming that would make modern society blush. Originally, Medusa was beautiful. Not just pretty, but stunningly, devastatingly beautiful. She was one of 3 Gorgon's sisters, but unlike her siblings Steno and Euryale, who were immortal monsters from birth, Medusa was mortal and gorgeous. She served as a priestess in Athena's temple, which required a vow of chastity. So far, so good, right? Beautiful woman, noble calling, serving the goddess of wisdom. What could go wrong? Well, Poseidon happened. The god of the sea took one look at Medusa and decided he absolutely had to have her, regardless of her feelings on the matter or her sacred vows. So he assaulted her. In Athena's temple, while she was serving as Athena's priestess. The disrespect is so layered, it's almost impressive in its awfulness. Now, you might think that Athena, goddess of wisdom and justice, would punish Poseidon for this violation of her temple and her priestess. But no, that would make too much sense. Instead, Athena decided that clearly the problem here was Medusa. Because apparently, getting assaulted in a temple makes you the guilty party in ancient Greek divine justice. So Athena cursed Medusa, turning her beautiful hair into writhing snakes and making her gaze deadly to anyone who looked upon her. Medusa went from being a beautiful priestess to being a monster so hideous that the mere sight of her would turn people to stone. It's like the ultimate punishment for a crime she didn't commit, delivered by the goddess who should have protected her. The transformation itself is horrifying when you really think about it. Imagine waking up one day and discovering that your hair has been replaced by venomous snakes that never stop moving. Every mirror becomes an enemy, every reflection a reminder of what you've lost. And then there's the isolation. You can never look at another human being again without killing them. You can never have a conversation, never touch someone, never experience any form of human connection without bringing death. But the Greeks weren't done with Medusa yet. Oh no, that would be too merciful. They then sent Perseus to kill her, turning her into a quest objective for a hero's journey. Perseus, armed with divine gifts, including a mirrored shield, winged sandals, and a magic sword, tracked down Medusa while she slept and cut off her head. Even in death, she wasn't allowed dignity. Her severed head continued to be used as a weapon, turning enemies to stone for Perseus and later Athena. The really twisted part is that from Medusa's blood sprang Pegasus, the beautiful winged horse, and Chrysaorus, a giant with a golden sword. Even in death, she was still creating life and beauty, which makes her treatment seem even more tragically unfair. She had this creative, life-giving power within her, but all anyone saw was the monster she'd been turned into. What makes Medusa particularly terrifying isn't just the turning people to stone thing, though that's certainly effective. It's the complete helplessness of her situation. She didn't choose to become a monster. She was victimized, then punished for being victimized, then hunted down and killed for the crime of existing as the monster she was forced to become. The isolation aspect of Medusa's curse is what really gets to you when you think about it late at night. She lived alone, surrounded by astounding statues that had once been living people. Probably some who had just stumbled upon her accidentally, others who had come seeking to harm her, all of them now frozen in their final moments of terror. Her home was essentially a graveyard of stone corpses, a constant reminder of the death she brought just by existing. Medusa represents the terror of being punished for things beyond your control, of having your identity stripped away and replaced with something monstrous, and of living with consequences that far outweigh any crime you might have committed. She's the ultimate symbol of injustice made manifest, and that's more frightening than any monster could ever be. At number 2, we have the Minotaur. And honestly, this creature's origin story is such a perfect storm of divine pettiness, human hubris, and family dysfunction that it reads like something out of the world's most twisted soap opera. The Minotaur manages to be terrifying, not just as a monster, but as a symbol of how badly things can go when gods get involved in human affairs and everyone starts making really poor decisions. Let's set the scene. King Minos of Crete is having some legitimacy issues with his claim to the throne. His brothers are also vying for power, and Minos needs some divine backing to prove he's the rightful king. So he prays to Poseidon, asking the god to send him a beautiful white bull from the sea as a sign of divine approval. In return, Minos promises to sacrifice this bull back to Poseidon. Poseidon, apparently in a helpful mood, sends the most gorgeous bull anyone has ever seen. It's so beautiful that Minos takes one look at it and thinks, you know what, I'm keeping this one. Surely Poseidon won't mind if I sacrifice a different bull instead, because apparently Minos thought he could pull a fast one on the god of the sea, which shows either impressive confidence or a complete lack of understanding about how vengeful Greek gods operate. Poseidon, predictably, was not amused by this bait-and-switch situation. But instead of just punishing Minos directly, that would be too straightforward for a Greek god, Poseidon decided to get creative with his revenge. He cursed Minos' wife, Pasiphae, to fall desperately, obsessively in love with the white bull. And when I say love, I mean love in the most complete, consuming, inappropriate way possible. Now, Pasiphae was dealing with a divinely induced obsession with a bull, which is already problematic on multiple levels. But instead of seeking help, or maybe just suffering in silence like a normal person, she decided to act on these feelings. She commissioned Daedalus, the master craftsman, to build her a wooden cow costume that was so realistic she could hide inside it, and, well, let's just say she successfully seduced the bull. The result of this union was the Minotaur, a creature with a human body and a bull's head who combined the worst traits of both species. He had human intelligence twisted with animal instincts, the strength of a bull with the cunning of a human, and an appetite for human flesh that made him impossible to control or contain. Minos, faced with this living reminder of his wife's divinely induced infidelity and his own poor decision-making, did what any rational person would do. He commissioned Daedalus to build an elaborate underground labyrinth beneath the palace and locked the Minotaur inside it. Problem solved, right? Except the Minotaur needed to eat, and his preferred diet consisted of human beings. So Minos instituted a tribute system with Athens, demanding that every 7 or 9 years, sources vary, the Athenians send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete to be fed to the Minotaur. These weren't criminals or volunteers, they were chosen by lot from among the youth of Athens, including the children of nobles and ordinary citizens alike. Think about the psychological horror of this arrangement for everyone involved. For the Athenians, every few years they had to watch their children be selected by lottery to be shipped off to Crete to die in the most horrible way possible. For the young people chosen, they knew exactly what fate awaited them. They would be sent into a labyrinth with no exit, to wander in darkness until they encountered a creature that would tear them apart and devour them. The labyrinth itself was a masterpiece of terrifying architecture. Daedalus designed it so that even if you somehow managed to avoid or kill the Minotaur, you still couldn't find your way out. The walls shifted, the passages led nowhere, and the entire structure was designed to drive people mad with hopelessness before the monster ever found them. It wasn't just a prison for the Minotaur, it was a death trap for his victims. The Minotaur wasn't even truly evil in the way we usually think of monsters. He was essentially a child who never learned how to be human, trapped in a body that was half animal and driven by instincts he couldn't control. He didn't choose to be a monster. He was created by the poor choices and divine punishment inflicted on his parents. In some versions of the myth, he's described as being able to speak, which makes his situation even more tragic. Imagine being intelligent enough to understand what you are, but unable to change your nature. When Theseus finally came to slay the Minotaur, it wasn't really a battle between good and evil. It was more like putting down a dangerous animal that had been created by human folly and divine spite. Theseus needed Ariadne's thread to find his way out of the labyrinth, because even after killing the monster, the real trap was the maze itself, a perfect metaphor for how the consequences of bad decisions can trap us long after we think we've solved the original problem. The Minotaur represents the terror of inherited consequences, of paying for the mistakes of others, and of being trapped by circumstances beyond your control. Both the monster and his victims were prisoners of choices made by people who thought they were cleverer than gods, and everyone suffered for that hubris. And here we are at number 1, the most terrifying monsters in Greek mythology, Scylla and Charybdis. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, that's 2 monsters. And you're absolutely right. But these 2 ladies worked as a team, and honestly, their partnership in making sailors' lives miserable was so effective that they really deserve to be considered as one ultimate nightmare scenario. Picture this. You're sailing through the Strait of Messina, trying to get home after maybe a decade-long war or just a really unfortunate grocery run, and you encounter what is essentially the ocean's version of being caught between a rock and a hard place. Except instead of a rock and a hard place, it's a 6-headed man-eating monster and a ship-swallowing whirlpool. The ancient Greeks really knew how to make a metaphor literal. Let's start with Scylla, because her transformation story is peak Greek tragedy, with a side of divine pettiness that would make reality TV producers weep with envy. Originally, Scylla was a beautiful sea nymph, because of course she was. The Greeks could not resist making their monsters former beauty queens. She caught the attention of Glaucus, a sea god, who had been transformed from a mortal fisherman into an immortal sea deity, which sounds like it should be a good thing until you remember that in Greek mythology, divine attention is usually the first sign that your life is about to become incredibly complicated. Glaucus fell hard for Scylla, but she wasn't interested. So naturally, instead of accepting rejection like a mature immortal being, he decided to seek help from Circe, the sorceress who specialized in transformation magic and had her own complicated relationship with men not taking no as an answer. Glaucus asked Circe to make him a love potion that would make Scylla fall for him, because apparently consent was a foreign concept even among the gods. But here's where it gets interesting. Circe took one look at Glaucus and decided she wanted him for herself. When he rejected her advances in favor of continuing to pursue Scylla, Circe got vengeful. Instead of making a love potion, she created a poison that she poured into the waters where Scylla liked to bathe. The poison transformed the beautiful nymph into a hideous monster with 6 heads, each equipped with triple rows of teeth and 12 tentacle-like legs. Scylla went from being a beautiful sea nymph to being a living nightmare in the span of one bath. Talk about your bad days. The transformation was horrifically complete. Scylla retained her consciousness and intelligence, so she was fully aware of what she had become, but she was driven by an insatiable hunger for human flesh. She was anchored to her spot in the strait, unable to move or escape, forced to spend eternity devouring sailors who had the misfortune to pass too close to her cave. Each of Scylla's 6 heads operated independently, which meant she could grab 6 sailors at once when ships passed by. Ancient sources describe the sound she made, a horrible barking noise that echoed across the water, warning sailors of the approaching doom while simultaneously paralyzing them with terror. Imagine hearing that sound in the middle of the night while you're trying to navigate dangerous waters, knowing that it means 6 of your crew members are about to be snatched up and devoured. Now, on the other side of the strait was Charybdis, and her story is somehow even more depressing because she became a monster for actually being loyal to her father. Charybdis was originally a naiad, a water nymph, and the daughter of Poseidon. She was incredibly loyal to her father and helped him in his ongoing feud with Zeus by flooding lands that Zeus wanted to keep dry. She was basically just being a good daughter, helping Dad with his work projects. Zeus, however, was not amused by Charybdis's interference in his geographical planning, so he cursed her, transforming her into a massive whirlpool that would suck down ships and water 3 times a day and then belch them back up. She became a living, conscious whirlpool, aware of her actions but unable to control them, forced to destroy ships and kill sailors for eternity as punishment for the crime of being a loyal daughter. The truly horrifying thing about Charybdis wasn't just that she could sink entire ships. It was the inevitability of it. When she started drawing in water, there was nothing anyone could do. No amount of skill or courage or divine favor could save you if you were caught in her pull. Ships would be drawn inexorably towards the center of the whirlpool, and everyone on board would watch helplessly as their death approached at a steady, unstoppable pace. Together, Scylla and Charybdis created what was essentially a maritime death trap. The strait was narrow enough that ships couldn't avoid both monsters. If you steered away from Scylla's cave to avoid being grabbed by her heads, you risked getting too close to Charybdis's whirlpool. If you stayed away from the whirlpool, you had to pass close enough to Scylla that she could snatch crew members. It was a perfect example of being caught between 2 equally terrible options, which is why we still use the phrase between Scylla and Charybdis today. The psychological horror of encountering these 2 monsters was immense. Sailors approaching the strait knew exactly what awaited them. They'd heard the stories, they knew the odds, and they knew that some of them weren't going to make it through. Ship captains had to choose which crew members they were willing to sacrifice to Scylla in order to keep the ship away from Charybdis. Can you imagine having to make that calculation? Looking at your crew and deciding which 6 people you're going to let die so the rest can survive? Even Odysseus, who was famous for being clever enough to outwit just about any supernatural threat, couldn't find a way to get past both monsters unscathed. He chose to risk Scylla rather than Charybdis, and watched helplessly as she grabbed 6 of his best men and devoured them while they screamed for help. The scene in the Odyssey where he describes hearing their final cries while being unable to save them is one of the most haunting passages in all of ancient literature. What makes Scylla and Charybdis the most terrifying monsters in Greek mythology isn't just their individual abilities to kill, it's the way they worked together to create an impossible situation. They represent the ultimate expression of being trapped by circumstances beyond your control, of having to choose between terrible options, and of watching people you care about suffer while you're powerless to help them. These weren't monsters you could defeat with strength or outwit with cleverness. They were forces of nature that had been created by divine spite and locked into their roles for eternity. They couldn't be reasoned with, bargained with, or avoided entirely. They simply existed, turning one of the major shipping routes of the ancient world into a permanent death trap. Scylla and Charybdis also represent the horror of transformation and punishment that goes beyond any reasonable scale of justice. Scylla was punished for rejecting unwanted romantic advances. Charybdis was punished for being loyal to her father. Both became eternal engines of destruction, conscious and aware, but unable to change their nature or escape their fate. The fact that they were both originally beautiful, innocent beings makes their transformation even chilling. It's the ultimate reminder that in the world of Greek mythology, no one was safe from divine wrath, and the punishment was almost always exponentially worse than whatever crime had supposedly been committed. And there you have it, friends. Our journey through the 5 most terrifying monsters of Greek mythology comes to a gentle close. From the riddle-asking Sphinx to the impossible choice presented by Scylla and Charybdis, we've explored creatures that represent humanity's deepest fears: intellectual inadequacy, persistent harassment, unjust punishment, inherited consequences, and impossible situations with no good solutions. The Greeks understood something profound about horror. The most terrifying monsters aren't just physically dangerous. They're the ones that strip away our humanity, force us into impossible choices, or punish us for things beyond our control. These creatures have haunted human imagination for thousands of years because they represent fears that are as relevant today as they were in ancient Greece. Sweet dreams, everyone. Try not to think too hard about riddles. Avoid any mysterious flying women offering to clean up your dinner. And remember that sometimes the real monsters are the gods we meet along the way. Until next time, sleep well and dream of better days, when the worst thing you had to worry about was whether your hair looked good, not whether it had turned into snakes.